Welcome to WD Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story. Today we are going to be doing the joke of the day.
Yay!
Yay! We haven't done that in like 2 days.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. But then we are going to be doing the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly, the one and the only. And then we are going to be doing Hinds feet on high places. We did the title as Much Afraid because that's the name of the character. So
Actually, because it's a lot easier to type on my phone.
yeah.
I don't know what that means.
What is that, JJ? All right, Daniel, come make us laugh.
Yeah, try me. Try me. What was that about?
What?
I don't know what JJ's doing.
Why can a leopard not hide?
Why can a leopard not hide?
Because he'll always be spotted. Stop.
I'm supposed to laugh at this joke.
No, stop.
It's hilarious.
Hater.
So I heard him say that joke, and I didn't know the punchline, but I was thinking maybe it was it had to do something with spots, but yeah, he's really good. Granny Bear liked it. Jessica said hi. Rebecca said lol, whatever that is, and Mom said what was that about? For probably JJ. Mom said hi, JJ. All right. So we're all caught up now. All right. So we are going to read 1 Peter chapter 3, English Standard Version of the Bible. Here we go. 1 Peter chapter 3. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. I have one comment to say, verse 16, 15 and 16, I guess, where it says, be ready, prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you're slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. I have a problem with Christian apologists who will just berate the people that they are talking to, and that kind of bothers me quite a bit. There's one that I'm not going to name in particular that I'm thinking of, but I know that there's others as well that they will maybe set up a debate or something with somebody else, and they'll just say, well, you're a fool, you're an idiot. Well, I'm pretty sure that attitude that person's showing isn't very Christ-like, and we should be showing the love of Christ wherever we are. So, with all that being said, here is Kimberly to provide a brief synopsis of yesterday's events. And here is Kimberly.
Dad.
No, it's not Kimberly, Dad.
Can you stop that?
It's like asking me to stop breathing.
Yeah, that is true.
You're so lucky to have a dad that's your cheerleader.
Okay. So what happened in the last chapter was basically Much Afraid was trapped in her house because her family decided, hey, let's all come over here and try to make her scared. And Chrissy's here. I'm not sure if you can see her very well, but she's got matted fur. Oh no. Yay!
Okay.
And so, I'll have to brush her later. So what happened was, Much Afraid was basically stuck in there for the whole day, and when the chief shepherd came by, he sang the signal song, and she couldn't answer, or she was completely shocked when she heard it at first, and then she couldn't answer. Because after a second or two, the rest of her family grabbed her and knocked her out and everything. So she couldn't do anything, and then she called to her neighbor later on, and her neighbor was this warrior person, and she was just saying, hey, she just stormed in there and single-handedly made all of the fearings run. And then she's like, hey, she didn't really understand, and she didn't tell her how to do that. So she did do this. She made a bell over her bed, and she said, hey, if you have a problem like this again, ring this bell, and my entire family is going to come over here and basically scare them away again.
Whoop their behinds.
Yeah. So that was about it. It was just a whole chapter of her being, captured and stuff. And I'm gonna give it to Dad now.
Hi. So, and we had that delicious argument over Mrs. Valiant yesterday. So I'm going to not perpetuate that any farther, but if you want to make your comments, go to yesterday's video and make your comments, and we can continue that debate. All right, so this is chapter 3, Flight in the Night. It rhymes. Haha. All right. For hours, poor Much Afraid lay sleepless on her bed, too bruised in mind and body to rest in one position, but tossing and turning wearily from side to side until long after midnight. Somewhere at the back of her mind was a dreadful uneasiness, as though there was something she ought to remember, but was unable to do so. When at last she fell asleep, this thought still haunted her. She woke suddenly an hour or two later, her mind intensely alert, conscious of an agonizing pain such as she had never known before. The thorn in her heart was throbbing and aching in a manner she could scarcely bear. It was as though the pain was hammering out something which at first she was still too confused to be able to understand. Then, all of a sudden, in a terrible flash, it became clear to her, and she found herself whispering over and over again, "The shepherd came and called me as he promised, but I didn't go to him or give any answer. Supposing he thought that I had changed my mind and didn't want to go with him. Supposing he has gone and left me behind. Gone without me, yes, left me behind." The shock of this thought was awful. This was the thing she had forgotten. He would not be able to understand why she had not gone out to him as he had told her. He had urged her to be ready to go with him the instant that he called, and there must be no delay, that he himself had to go to the mountains, to the mountains on urgent business. She had not been able to go even to the trysting place as usual that evening. Of course, he would think that she was afraid. Perhaps he was gone already and alone. Much Afraid turned icy cold, and her teeth chattered, but it was the pain in her heart which was the most awful part of her distress. It seemed to suffocate her as she lay there in bed. She sat up, shivering with cold and with the horror of the thought. She could not bear it if he had gone and left her behind. On the table beside her lay the old songbook. Glancing down at it in the light of the lamp, she saw it was open at the page whereupon was written a song about another shepherdess. She, just like herself, had failed to respond to the call of love, and then found too late that love had gone away. It had always seemed to her such a sad song that she could hardly read it, but now as she read the words again in the dark loneliness of the night, it seemed as though it was the cry of her own forlorn and terrified heart. By night on my bed I sought him, he whom my soul loveth so. I sought, but I could not find him, and now I will rise and go. Out in the streets of the city, and out on the broad highway. For he whom my soul so loveth hath left me and gone away. The page in the little songbook ended there, and she did not turn the leaf. Suddenly she could bear the uncertainty no longer. She must see for herself at once if he really had gone away and left her behind. She slipped out of bed, dressed herself as quickly as her shaking fingers would permit, and then unlocked the cottage door. She, too, would go out into the street and the broad highway, and would see if she could find him, would see if he had gone and left her behind, or, oh, if only it were possible, if he had waited to give her another chance. Opening the door, she went out into the darkness. 100 craven fears lurking in the lonely street could not have deterred her at that moment, for the pain in her heart swallowed up fear and everything else and drove her forth. So in the dark hours, just before the dawn, Much Afraid started off to look for the shepherd. She could not go quickly because of her lameness, but limped along the village streets toward the open fields and the sheepfolds. As she went, she whispered to herself, "O shepherd, When you said that love and pain go together, how truly you spoke. Had she but known, or even dimly sensed, what it would be like, could she possibly have consented to let him put the thorn in her heart? It was too late now. It was there. Love was there, and pain too, and she must find the shepherd. At last, limping and breathless, she came to the sheepfold, still and silent in the dim starlight. 1 or 2 under-shepherds were there, keeping watch over their flocks through the night. And when they heard footsteps approaching, they rose up from the ground and went to meet the intruder. "Who are you?" they challenged her in the darkness, then stared in amazement as their lanterns flashed on the white face and frightened eyes of Much Afraid. "Is the chief shepherd here?" she gasped, and she leaned against the wall of the sheepfold, panting and trying to recover her breath. "No," said the watchman, staring at her curiously. "He left the flocks in our charge this night and gave his orders. He said that he had to make a journey to the mountains, as he often does, and did not say when he would return." Much Afraid could not speak. She moaned and pressed her hands to her heart, feeling as though it would break. What could she do now? He was gone. He had thought that she did not want to go, and had not waited for her. Then, aching with despair, as she leaned tremblingly against the wall of the fold, she remembered the shepherd's face and the loving kindness of the look with which he had invited her to accompany him to the mountains. It came to her mind that he who understood her so well, who knew all about her fears and had compassion on her, would not leave until he was quite sure that she really meant to refuse to go with him. She lifted her eyes, looked across the valley toward the eastern mountains and the high places. A faint streak of light was appearing in the east, and she knew that soon the sun would rise. Suddenly she remembered the last verse in the sad song which she had read, the last verse on the page which she had not waited to turn over. It came whispering into her mind, just as a little bird began to sing in one of the bushes beside her. "And then, in the dawn I saw him, he whom my heart loveth so. I found him, held him, and told him I never could let him go." Canticles 3, 1-5. Much Afraid ceased trembling and said to herself, "I will go to the trysting place and see if he is waiting for me there." With scarcely a word to the watchman, she turned and hurried southward over the field where Craven Fear had met her toward the sheep pool. Almost forgetting that she was lame, she sped toward the distant trees which fringed the pool. Just as the sky turned red above the mountains, the joyous, babbling sound of the cascading water reached her ears, and as she hurried forward, Much Afraid suddenly found a cascade of song pouring forth from her own heart. He was there, standing by the pool, looking toward her with the light of the sunrise shining on his face. As Much Afraid stumbled toward him, he stepped quickly to her side, and she fell at his feet, sobbing, "Oh, my Lord, take me with you as you said. Don't leave me behind." "I knew you would come," he said gently. "But, Much Afraid, why were you not at the trysting place last evening? Did you not hear me when I passed your cottage and called? I wanted to tell you to be ready to start with me this morning at sunrise." As he spoke, the sun rose fully over the peaks of the mountains and bathed them both in the lovely golden light. "I am here," said Much Afraid, still kneeling at his feet, "and I will go with you anywhere." Then the shepherd took her by the hand, and they started for the mountains. And before we read chapter 4, Start for the High Places, I would like to ask someone to give me one more pillow, please.
Nope.
Please. Bitte, 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 bitte.
Read the question from
Daniel, give that to Dad.
Oh, I can't reach that. All right.
Sorry, I didn't want to knock anything over.
All right, and we're having some He loves to see Kimberly B smile. Such and such, such and such. GQ Spirit. I'm not sure what... Whoops. No, I don't want to do that. Okay. Chrissy, question for Kimmy. Should Much Afraid have believed the uncle that she wouldn't have been forced to marry her cousin Craven Fear?
Nope.
I don't think so. Always seek the shepherd when your heart pains you. Okay, so this is better. All right, so chapter 4. Start for the high places. It was early morning of a beautiful day. The valley lay as though still asleep. Still asleep. The only sounds were the joyful laughter of the running streams and the gay little songs of the birds. The dew sparkled on the grass, and the wild flowers glowed like little jewels. Especially lovely were the wild anemones, purple, pink, and scarlet, which dotted the pastures everywhere, thrusting their beautiful little faces up through the straggling thorns. Sometimes the shepherd and Much Afraid walked over patches of thousands of tiny little pink or mauve blossoms, each minutely small, and yet all together forming a brilliant carpet, far richer than any seen in the king's palace. Once the shepherd stooped and touched the flowers gently with his fingers, then said to Much Afraid with a smile, "Humble yourself, and you will find that love is spreading a carpet of flowers beneath your feet." Much Afraid looked at him earnestly. "I have often wondered about the wild flowers," she said. "It does seem strange that such unnumbered multitudes should bloom in the wild places of the earth, where perhaps nobody ever sees them, and the goats and the cattle can walk over them and crush them to death. They have so much beauty and sweetness to give, and no one on whom to lavish it, nor who will ever appreciate it." The look the shepherd turned on her was very beautiful. "Nothing my father and I have made is ever wasted," he said quietly, "and the little flowers have a wonderful lesson to teach. They offer themselves so sweetly and confidently and willingly, even if it seems that there is no one to appreciate them, just as though they sang a joyous little song to themselves, that it is so happy to love, even though one is not loved in return. I must tell you a great truth, Much Afraid, which only the few understand. All the fairest beauties in the human soul, its greatest victories and its most splendid achievements are always those which no one else knows anything about, or can only dimly guess at. Every inner response of the human heart to love and every conquest over self-love is a new flower on the tree of love. Many a quiet, ordinary, and hidden life unknown to the world is a veritable garden in which love's flowers and fruits have come to such perfection that it is a place of delight where the King of Love himself walks and rejoices with his friends. Some of my servants have indeed won great visible victories and are rightly loved and reverenced by other men, but always their greatest victories are like the wild flowers, those which no one knows about. Learn this lesson now down here in the valley, Much Afraid, and when you get to the steep places of the mountains, it will comfort you." Then he added, "Come, the birds are all singing so joyously. Let us join them too, and the flowers shall suggest the theme of our song." So, as they walked down the valley toward the river, they sang together another of the old songs in the shepherd's book, singing the parts in turn. "I am the rose of Sharon, a wild anemone, a lily among the thorn trees. So is my love to me. An apple tree among wild trees, my love is in my sight. I sit down in his shadow, his fruit is my delight. He brought me to his palace and to the banquet hall, to share with me his greatness, I who am least of all. Oh, give me help and comfort, for I am sick with shame, unfit to be his consort, unfit to bear his name. I charge you, O ye daughters, ye rows among the trees, stir not my sleeping loved one, to love me ere he please. Canticles 2, 1 through 4, and number 7. Just as they finished singing this song, they came to a place where a rushing stream poured itself across the path they were following and went cascading down the other side. It was running so swiftly and singing so loudly that it seemed to fill the valley around them with its laughing voice. As the shepherd lifted, much afraid, across the slippery wet stones, she said to him, I do wish I knew what it is that all running water sings. Sometimes in the silence of the night I lie in bed and listen to the voice of the little stream which runs past our cottage garden. It sounds so happy and so eager, and as though it were repeating to itself over and over again some very lovely secret message. I think all running water seems to be singing the same song, either loud and clear or soft and low. I do wish I knew what the waters were saying. It is quite different from the voice of the sea and the salt waters, but I never can understand it. It is an unknown tongue. Tell me, shepherd, do you know what all the waters sing as they hurry on their way? The shepherd smiled again, as they stood silently for a few moments by the little torrent, which seemed to shout even more loudly and exultantly, as though it knew they had paused to listen. Suddenly, as Much Afraid stood beside the shepherd, it seemed as though her ears and her understanding were open, and bit by bit the water language became clear. It is, of course, impossible to write it in water language, but this is the best I can do to translate it. Of course, it is a very poor effort, for though a water song perhaps may be set to music, words are quite a different matter. But it went something like this. The water song. Come, oh come, let us away, lower, lower every day. Oh, what joy it is to race down to find the lowest place. This is the dearest law we know. It is happy to go low. Sweetest urge and sweetest will, let us go down lower still. Hear the summons night and day, calling us to come away. From the heights we leap and flow to the valleys down below, always answering to the call to the lowest place of all. Sweetest urge and sweetest pain, to go low and rise again. Again, pain, gain. That is very puzzling, said Much Afraid, after she had listened for a little and found that this was the refrain, repeating over and over again, though with 1,000 variations of little trills and murmurs and bubbles and splashing sighs. Let us go down lower still, the water seems to be singing so gladly, because it is hurrying to go down to the lowest place, and yet you are calling me to the highest places. What does it mean? The high places, answered the shepherd, are the starting places for the journey down to the lowest places in the world. When you have hinds feet and can go leaping on the mountains and skipping on the hills, you will be able, as I am, to run down from the heights in the gladdest self-giving and then go up to the mountains again. You will be able to mount to the high places swifter than eagles, for it is only up on the high places of love that anyone can receive the power to pour themselves down in an utter abandonment of self-giving. This saying seemed very mysterious and strange, but now that her ears had been opened to understand the water song, she heard it repeated over and over again by all the little streams which crossed their pathway or ran beside it. It seemed, too, that the wild flowers were also singing the same sort of song, only in yet another language, a color language which, like the water tongue, could only be understood by the heart and not by the mind. They seemed to have a little chorus all their own, which thousands upon thousands of them were singing in different color notes. This is the law by which we live. It is so sweet to give and give." After that it seemed to Much Afraid that all the little birds were chirruping and trilling and lilting a tiny theme song also, with unnumbered variations, but still with one chorus breaking in all the time. "This is the joy of all winged life above. Happy it is to be able to love." "I never knew before," said Much Afraid suddenly, "that the valley is such a beautiful place and so full of song." The shepherd laughed and answered, "Only love can really understand the music and the beauty and the joy which was planted in the heart of all created things. Have you forgotten that 2 days ago I planted the seed of love in your heart? Already it has begun to make you hear and see things which you did not notice before. As love grows in you, Much Afraid, you will come to understand many things which you never dreamt of before. You will develop the gift of understanding many unknown tongues, and you will learn to speak love's own language too. But first, you must learn to spell out the alphabet of love and to develop Hinds' feet. Both these things you will learn on the journey to the high places. And now here we are at the river, and over on the other side of the foothills of the mountains begin. There we shall find your 2 guides waiting for you." It was strange and wonderful indeed, thought Much Afraid, that they had reached the river so quickly and were already approaching the mountains. Upheld by the shepherd's hand and supported by his strength, she had really forgotten her lameness and had been unconscious of either tiredness or weakness. Oh, if only he would take her the whole way to the mountain places instead of giving her over to the care of the other guides. When she thought of this, she said to him imploringly, "Will you not take me all the way? When I am with you, I am strong, and I am sure no one else but you can get me up to the high places." He looked at her most kindly, but answered quietly, "Much Afraid, I could do what you wish. I could carry you all the way up to the high places myself, instead of leaving you to climb there. But if I did, you would never be able to develop Hinds' feet and become my companion and go where I go. If you will climb to the heights this once with the companions I have chosen for you, even though it may seem a very long and in some places a very difficult journey, I promise you that you will develop Hinds' feet. Afterward, you will be able to go with me, leaping on the mountains, and be able to make the ascent and the descent in the twinkling of an eye. Moreover, if I carry you up to the high places now, with only a tiny seed of love in your heart, you will not be able to live in the kingdom of love. You will have to stay outside on places not so high, still within reach of your enemies. Some of them, you know, can visit the lower parts of this mountain. I have no doubt that you will meet them as you make the ascent. That is why I have most carefully chosen for you 2 of the very best and strongest guides. I assure you, however, that never for a moment shall I be beyond your reach or call for help, even when you cannot see me. It is just as though I shall be present with you all the time, even though invisible, and you have my faithful promise that this journey, which you are now to make, will be the means of developing your Hinds' feet." "You will give me a new name when I get to the top?" quavered poor Much Afraid, who all of a sudden seemed to have become deaf to the music around her and to be full of fears and forebodings again. "Yes, certainly. When the flower of love is ready to bloom in your heart, you will be loved in return, and will receive a new name," replied the shepherd. Much Afraid paused on the bridge and looked back over the way they had come. The valley looked very green and peaceful, while the mountains to whose foot they had come towered above them like gigantic and threatening ramparts. Far away in the distance she could see the trees growing around the village of Much Trembling, and with the sudden pang she pictured the shepherd's helpers going up going about their happy work, the flocks wandering over the pastures, and the peaceful little white cottage in which she had lived. As these scenes rose before her, tears began to prick her eyes, and the thorn pricked in her heart. But almost at once she turned to the shepherd and said thankfully, "I will trust you and do whatever you want." Then, as she looked up in his face, he smiled most sweetly and said something he had never said before. "You have one real beauty, Much Afraid. You have such trustful eyes. Trust is one of the most beautiful things in the world. When I look at the trust in your eyes, I find you more beautiful to look upon than many a lovely queen." In a very short time they were over the bridge and had come to the foot of the mountains, where the path began the ascent of the lower slopes. Here great boulders were scattered all around, and suddenly Much Afraid saw the figures of two veiled women seated on one of the rocks at the side of the path. As the shepherd and she came to that place, the two rose and bowed silently to him. "Here are the two guides which I promised," said the shepherd quietly. "From now on, until you are over the steep and difficult places, they will be your companions and helpers." Much Afraid looked at them fearfully. Certainly they were tall and appeared to be very strong. But why were they veiled? For what reason did they hide their faces? The longer and closer she looked at them, the more she began to dread them. They were so silent, so strong, and so mysterious. Why did they not speak? Why give her no friendly word of greeting? "Who are they?" she whispered to the shepherd. "Will you tell me their names, and why don't they speak to me? Are they dumb?" "No, they are not dumb," said the shepherd very quietly, "but they speak a new language, Much Afraid, a dialect of the mountains which you have not yet learned. But as you travel with them, little by little, you will learn to understand their words. They are good teachers indeed. I have few better. As for their names, I will tell you them in your own language, and later you will learn what they are called in their own tongue. This," said he, motioning toward the first of the silent figures, "is named Sorrow, and the other is her twin sister, Suffering." Poor Much Afraid! Her cheeks blanched, and she began to tremble from head to foot. She felt so like fainting that she clung to the shepherd for support. "I can't go with them," she gasped. I can't! Oh, my Lord Shepherd, why do you want me to do this? How can I travel in their company? It is more than I can bear. You tell me that the mountain way itself is steep and difficult, that I cannot climb it alone. Then why, oh, why must you make Sorrow and Suffering my companions? Couldn't you have given me joy and peace to go with me, to strengthen me and encourage me and help me on the difficult way? I never thought you would do this to me." And she burst into tears. A strange look passed over the shepherd's face as he listened to the outburst. Then, looking at the veiled figures as he spoke, he answered very gently, "Joy and peace. Are those the companions you would choose for yourself? You remember your promise to accept the helpers that I would give, because you believed that I would choose the very best possible guides for you. Will you still trust me, Much Afraid? Will you go with them, or do you wish to turn back to the valley? And to all your fearing relatives, to Craven Fear himself?" Much Afraid shuddered. The choice seemed terrible. Fear she knew only too well, but Sorrow and Suffering had always seemed to her the two most terrifying things which she could encounter. How could she go with them and abandon herself to their power and control? It was impossible. Then she looked at the shepherd and suddenly knew she could not doubt him, could not possibly turn back from following him, that if she were unfit and unable to love anyone else in the world, yet in her trembling, miserable little heart, she did love him. Even if he asked the impossible, she could not refuse. She looked at him piteously, then said, "Do I wish to turn back? O shepherd, to whom should I go? In all the world I have no one but you. Help me to follow you, even though it seems impossible. Help me to trust you as much as I long to love you." As he heard these words, the shepherd suddenly lifted his head and laughed, a laugh full of exultation and triumph and delight. It echoed round the rocky walls of the little canyon in which they stood, until for a moment or two it seemed as though the whole mountain range was laughing with him. The echoes bounded higher and higher, leaping from rock to rock, and from crag to crag up to the highest summits, until it seemed as though the last faint echoes of it were running into heaven itself. When the last note had faded into silence, his voice said very softly, "Thou art all fair, my love. There is no spot in thee." Canticles 4:7. Then he added, "Fear not, much afraid, only believe. I promise that you shall not be put to shame. Go with sorrow, and go with suffering, and if you cannot welcome them now, when you come to the difficult places where you cannot manage alone, put your hands in theirs confidently, and they will take you exactly where I want you to go." Much Afraid stood quite still, looking up into his face, which now had such a happy, exultant look. The look of one who above all things else delights in saving and delivering. In her heart the words of a hymn written by another of the shepherd's followers began to run through her mind, and she started to sing softly and sweetly. "Let sorrow do its work, send grief or pain. Sweet are thy messengers, sweet their refrain. If they but work in me more love, O Christ, to thee, more love to thee, more love to thee." Others have gone this way before me, she thought, and they could even sing about it afterward. Will he who is so strong and gentle be less faithful and less gracious to me, weak and cowardly though I am, when it is so obvious that the thing he delights in most of all is to deliver his followers from all their fears and to take them to the high places? With this came the thought that the sooner she went with these two new guides, the sooner she would reach those glorious high places. She stepped forward, looking at the two veiled figures, and said with a courage which she had never felt before, "I will go with you. Please, lead the way." For even then she could not bring herself to put out her hands to grasp theirs. The shepherd laughed again, and then said clearly, "My peace I leave with you. My joy be fulfilled in you. Remember that I pledge myself to bring you to the high places at the top of these mountains, and that you shall not be put to shame. And now, till the daybreak, and the shadows flee away, I will be like a roe or a young hart on the mountains." Canticles 2:17. Then, before Much Afraid could realize what was happening, he had leapt on to a great rock at the side of the path, and from there to another, and to yet another, swifter almost than her eyes could follow his movements. He was leaping up the mountain, springing from height to height, going on before them until in a moment or two he was lost to sight. When they could see him no longer, Much Afraid and her two companions began to ascend the foothills. It would have been a curious sight had there been anyone to watch, as Much Afraid started on her journey, limping toward the high places, shrinking as far as possible from the two veiled figures beside her, pretending not to see their proffered hands. But there was no one there to see. For if there is one thing more certain than another, it is that the development of hinds feet is a secret process demanding that there should be no onlookers. Chapter 5 is called Encounter with Pride. So that sounds like it's going to be a fun little journey. Yay! Who wants me to read chapter 5? Okay, so I just want to say... He's either asleep or he's mostly there. But I just want to say that every time that I read, and of course this book was introduced to me by Jenny, or Mom, as some of you know her as. And
Before we were married.
she handed it to me. And And I read it, but I also knew that there is a Hinds in her family. And, like, I know it's spelled differently, but it sounds the same. Hinds. And so it just always kind of... For some reason, I don't know if that ever was a thing for you. I don't know why, but I just had to share that.
She called herself... She told me that she calls herself the Ketchup Police.
The Ketchup Police.
Yes.
Because Heinz ketchup.
Okay, so anyway, I don't know if that's ever been a thing in your family. Leave a comment if you've ever thought of that before, or if it's ever meant anything to you before. Your loco is what I'm getting, so it is what it is. Anyway, I think that we should not read chapter 5 tonight. Tomorrow and Wednesday night for here henceforth.
We're not reading tonight, tomorrow, and Wednesday night?
Time out, Kim. I'm in the middle of a sentence. We're not going to read any more tonight. Tomorrow night and every Wednesday night henceforth, when we have church, we are most likely, unless there's some reason why we can't stay late, like if it's raining or something, gonna let JJ play with his friends at the church, because it is one opportunity that he gets to play with a massive amount of friends. And so we will not be doing live streams on Wednesday night. Hinds feet won't get you very far. That's good.
Is that where my feet came from?
All right. So anyway, long story long, we won't be doing live streaming on Wednesday nights. So we will most likely see you again on Thursday. On Friday and Saturday, Kimberly's got Discipleship Now, so we won't be doing live streaming on Friday and Saturday this week. Next week on Friday and Saturday, Kimberly's got a youth retreat, so we won't be doing live streaming Friday and Saturday next week. So the next couple of weeks are going to have a little bit of short schedules, but I hope that you are enjoying the story. We will get through it as quickly as we can, and we are still set to start a big project beginning on March 26th. So bring all your friends and invite your neighbors and tell everybody to start listening on March 26th if they haven't already, because I promise it's going to be something fabulous. And that was free. So I will talk to you later, and I'm just rambling now. So have a good night, and God bless you. Good night.